As indicated by the version of Unity being used for this project, 2018 was the year when I started learning how to make games. I started playing games from a very young age, and it didn't take long for me to decide I wanted to learn the skills necessary for me to create my own video games. As soon as I got the chance, I went from the regular education system to a more vocational trade school style education, and I started learning how to code. 5 years later, with 2 programming courses under my belt, I realized I definitely had enough knowledge to start working on that childhood dream, and the result was Voxel Snake. I spent a big chunk of my 2018 summer break learning how to code in C# and how to work with the Unity engine. And contrary to what some might think, that was the easiest part of the journey. YouTube has some great tutorials for beginners, and my previous experience with coding really helped speed up the learning process. The hardest part was coming up with a feasible idea for my first original game. Before I started working on Voxel Snake, I had a couple other ideas, but they were way too complicated for a first project. One of these ideas was a sort of 3D RPG game with a turn-based combat system. I actually tried to work on this idea, but I barely made it past the movement system before I realized I was way out of my depth. Eventually I came up with a more suitable idea. I should probably start by trying to make something simple that already exists. I would still go through the challenge of making a game by myself, but without the added difficulty of having to design an original game. So I started working on Voxel Snake. The idea was to just make a simple Snake game, and I ended up making it in 3D because all the Unity tutorials I watched were about working with the 3D assets. After setting up a simple placeholder level, I started working on the basic movement of the snake, and I immediately encountered what ended up being the biggest challenge of this project: the movement of the snake segments. In every snake game, you control the head of the snake, and then the segments of the snake's body follow each other in that characteristic snake game fashion. The problem is that I wanted the snake to have this continuous fluid movement instead of moving on a grid and snapping from place to place, like in most snake games. Unfortunately, tutorials and forum discussions seem to favor the latter option, which was apparently the most simple and straightforward movement method for the snake game. But I really wanted to have that continuous movement style, so I just went ahead and tried to figure out my own ugly and probably very unoptimized movement system for my snake. So this is how I get the segments to follow each other and the snake's head. Basically, there are 2 lists, the stored positions list and the stored rotations list. One keeps track of the snake's head position, and the other one keeps track of the rotations of the snake's head. And this method runs every frame. This is on update. So every frame, the position and rotation of the snake's head is saved in these lists. At some point, these lists would get so big that the game would visibly start freezing up, so I added this bit of code. Thankfully, I noticed that was happening and I decided to add this. This is the least bit of optimization I put into this code. Everything else is still kind of weird. But then basically what happens is when you pick up a fruit, a segment spawns. I spawn it using instantiate. This is not good. It's kind of unoptimized. For some reason, I spawned the snake segment in the position 000. I'm not sure why. List limit increases to 100%. I don't know what's happening. But then here, this method runs every frame as well. And it goes through a list of snake segments. And for each snake segment, it updates the segment's position and rotation with a position and rotation from the lists that store the positions and rotations of the snake's head with a certain offset, so that each segment falls behind the last one for a certain distance. This whole code is kind of weird, and you can see it in the result, the final result if you pay attention, the snake segments kind of move inconsistently. Sometimes they are very close to each other, sometimes they are far away from each other, and they kind of warp back and forward if you pay attention. The movement is totally not smooth. It is very weird. The code is very unoptimized. The whole game is very unoptimized, and I would definitely do this differently with all that I have learned since then. I was still very happy with the result for my first attempt at coming up with something like this, but it's definitely not optimal at all. Now, about the ugly code, there's definitely a lot that could be improved when it comes to script organization and clean code, but for this first project, I was more worried about making things work than writing pretty code. I've learned a lot since then, and it definitely pays off to be more organized and clean. Scripts become more readable and easier to understand, and the structure of your project becomes easier to navigate and build upon. Some extra stuff that I added to the game were a settings menu and a high score tracking system. Both of those things were afterthoughts that weren't very well implemented because once I had the game finished, I really just wanted to share it online and get some feedback. I was too excited to polish anything that wasn't a core part of the game. I didn't spend enough time with the main menu, the settings menu is kind of buggy and not that useful, and the high score system only works locally, which isn't very impressive. But the actual game was working, and that was the important part. I definitely needed to polish more in the future though. The 3D assets were made with Magica Voxel, a free voxel modeling software, and the sound was all royalty-free stuff from Sound Bible and Bensound. I wasn't looking to make anything too complex in the graphics and sound departments, especially since I completely lacked experience in 3D modeling and audio production. Still, I think the 3D assets came out alright. I would have liked to make my own music and sound effects, but that was going to be a whole new learning challenge, and for a first project, my goal was to just have a working playable game. And that goal had been met. So I just threw in some royalty-free tracks and the job was done. I published Voxel Snake in GameJolt and itch.io, and I was actually surprised that not too long after I uploaded the game, some people were showing up to leave comments and rate the game. It was a really cool experience, and I was definitely motivated to work on more Unity projects. If you found the video interesting, you can go down below and leave a like and or a comment if you'd like to discuss the project that I just showed. Also, if you want to see what comes up next, you can subscribe. That would be pretty cool. The links to Voxel Snake are going to be in the description, and I'll see you later.